Hello and welcome to this special event, Justice for Sarah Halimi. An international movement is born, hosted by the Representative Council of French Jewish Institutions and the Combat Antisemitism Movement. I'm your host, Nurit Ben. Thanks so much for joining us today for an important conversation on a pressing issue. It was just last month that a French court ruled to acquit the man who murdered French Jew Sarah Halimi, and the outrage over it is still fresh. Recent weeks have seen people of conscience around the world take to social media and to the streets in protest. It's been an inspiring show of global solidarity and strength, but now a collective and collaborative effort is needed to ensure no Jew in France is again denied justice like the bereaved Halimi family. Together, delivering the message that there is never an excuse for anti-Semitism and all perpetrators of hate crimes must be held accountable by a court of law. We're broadcasting on Zoom, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. If you miss anything, a full recording will be available online shortly after we wrap here today. But before we hear from our first speakers, here's a closer look at the case that has rattled communities in and outside of France. Horrific case, to say the very least. The French Jewish community has watched it with concern in recent years and has led efforts to obtain justice for Sarah Halimi and her family. We're honored to have with us today the top voice of this community, Francis Khalifa, president of the Representative Council of French Jewish Institutions, also known as CRIF. Mr. Khalifa, thank you so much for joining us. Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous et je vous laisse la parole.
Bien, écoutez, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je suis particulièrement heureux de vous retrouver autour de cet événement important dédié à Sarah Halimi. Le CRIF et CAME, Combat Antisemitism Movement, ont travaillé ensemble pour faire entendre une partie des acteurs mobilisés autour d'un véritable déni de justice, autour de ce qui convient d'appeler maintenant l'affaire Sarah Halimi. Et nous sommes convaincus que cet événement d'aujourd'hui permettra d'amplifier et de renforcer l'élan de solidarité et de mobilisation internationale pour que, enfin, justice soit rendue à Sarah Halimi. Le 4 avril 2016, à 4h41 du matin, le corps sans vie d'une femme de 66 ans gît dans la cour intérieure de l'immeuble qu'elle habite au 26 rue Vaucouleurs, à Paris, dans le 11e arrondissement. Torturée au rythme de sourates du Coran, Sarah Halimi vient d'être défenestrée vivante par le balcon de son propre appartement au cri de Allahu Akbar par un jeune français musulman de 27 ans, d'origine malienne, un délinquant multirécidiviste, récemment radicalisé probablement lors d'un séjour en prison et qui fréquentait une mosquée salafiste. Le 14 avril 2021, la Cour de cassation confirmait le jugement de la Cour d'appel de la Chambre de l'instruction et déclarait irresponsable pénalement l'assassin de Sarah Halimi. Et alors que, bien plus qu'une évidence, il s'agit là d'un cas d'école pour décrire un meurtre antisémite, ce crime ignoble ne sera pas jugé et la Haute Cour prive définitivement la famille de Sarah Halimi d'un procès indispensable à son travail de deuil. Mais elle vient aussi priver la France tout entière d'un nécessaire procès de l'antisémitisme qui tue encore en France aujourd'hui. Car Sarah Halimi n'a pas été assassinée parce qu'elle se trouvait par hasard sur le chemin du tueur. Sarah Halimi n'a pas été défenestrée parce qu'elle avait de l'argent. Non, Sarah Halimi a été bestialement assassinée parce qu'elle était juive et pour cette unique raison. Elle a été la victime d'un crime antisémite pensé, planifié et exécuté dans un rituel et une mise en scène islamiste barbare et sordide. Elle est la victime de cet antisémitisme que la société française peine à reconnaître et à nommer. Oui, Sarah Halimi est la victime expiatoire de l'antisémitisme islamiste. Et au moment où j'évoque l'antisémitisme qui tue encore en France, je me fais toujours un devoir de rappeler la mémoire et les noms des 12 Français, hommes, femmes, personnes âgées et enfants, assassinés en France depuis 2003 au seul motif qu'ils étaient juifs. Sébastien Selam, 23 ans, assassiné le 20 novembre 2003 dans le parking de son immeuble. Ilan Halimi, 24 ans, séquestré et assassiné le 13 février 2006 entre Bagneux et Sainte-Geneviève-des-Bois. Jonathan Sandler, 30 ans, et ses 2 enfants, Gabriel, 3 ans, et Arié, 6 ans, et Myriam Monsonego, 8 ans, tous les 4, victimes de l'attaque terroriste contre l'école aux Oratora de Toulouse le 19 mars 2012. Johan Cohen, 20 ans. Yoav Attab, 22 ans. Philippe Braham, 45 ans, et François-Michel Saada, 63 ans, tous les 4, pris en otage et assassinés pendant qu'ils faisaient leurs courses à l'hypercachère le 9 janvier 2015. Mireille Knoll, 86 ans, torturé et assassiné le 23 mars 2018 à son domicile à Paris. Et Sarah Halimi, 62 ans, torturée et assassinée le 4 avril 2017 à son domicile à Paris. Et alors qu'il s'agit là d'un cas d'école pour décrire un meurtre antisémite, ce crime ignoble ne sera pas jugé. Dans un contexte où l'antisémitisme ne faiblit pas, la Haute Cour envoie un très mauvais signal. Elle met à bas 20 ans d'efforts et de combats pour qu'enfin l'on reconnaisse que les actes et violences que subissent les Français juifs ne sont pas de la violence ordinaire, mais bien l'expression violente d'un antisémitisme nouveau. Et c'est une terrible régression, particulièrement inquiétante par l'impunité qu'elle induit. Comment la justice de notre pays peut-elle à la fois reconnaître le caractère antisémite d'un crime et offrir l'impunité à son auteur en refusant qu'il soit jugé? Nous sommes en pleine schizophrénie. Et nous le dirons jamais assez. Sarah Halimi a été tuée 2 fois. Elle est bien sûr d'abord la victime de l'antisémitisme, de l'islamisme du tueur. Mais Sarah Halimi est aussi la victime d'un déni de justice et d'un naufrage judiciaire. Et au lieu de faire porter la responsabilité de l'acte sur celui qui s'est volontairement drogué, on fait porter la responsabilité sur la drogue. C'est choquant et horriblement injuste. Si la Cour de cassation a dit le droit, elle n'a pas dit la justice. Pour dire la justice, les magistrats avaient une autre interprétation possible, celle de contribuer, comme ils en ont la responsabilité, à l'évolution de la jurisprudence, à l'aune de l'évolution de la société. Ils ont préféré avoir une lecture stricte et restrictive du texte de loi et ont renvoyé la balle aux législateurs. Sans unanimité parfaite entre les différentes expertises psychiatriques, le doute aurait dû profiter à la victime et pas à l'accusé. Et là encore, le courage aurait été de laisser à une cour d'assises et à un jury populaire la responsabilité de ce débat. Le verdict, quoi qu'il eût été, parce que rendu au nom du peuple français, n'aurait ouvert la voie à aucune contestation. En ayant une lecture mécanique du texte de loi, les hauts magistrats, s'ils ont dit le droit de façon très restrictive. Et c'est une décision inique, un déni de justice et peut-être aussi une décision politique. Oui, nous sommes en droit de nous demander si Sarah Halimi n'est pas la victime collatérale d'un conflit entre l'exécutif et le pouvoir judiciaire, et plus précisément, entre les magistrats et le président de la République, à qui ils ont voulu redire leur indépendance. Alors que l'émotion exprimée par Emmanuel Macron traduisait celle d'une grande partie de la société française et sa volonté légitime que justice soit rendue. Enfin, pour conclure, je veux rappeler que le combat contre l'antisémitisme et le choc de ce désastre judiciaire n'est pas l'affaire des Français juifs, mais bien l'affaire de toute la société française, c'est l'affaire de la France.
12 French citizens murdered for being Jewish since 2003. Thank you for remembering their names, for telling us, reminding us of their stories. Of course, the horrific case of Sarah Halimi being the last one. Thank you so much, Mr. Khalifa. Merci pour ces mots importants et pour votre implication sur cette affaire.
Merci à vous.
Well, of course, in the French court's handling of the Halimi case, the biggest victim has been the Halimi family itself. Joining us now to tell their story is Sarah Halimi's son, Yonatan. Yonatan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us for what I can only imagine is a difficult conversation. And it is hard to imagine what your family has been through, from the murder itself to this prolonged and frustrating legal drama. So tell us more than anything about your beloved mother, who was taken far too soon.
Je vous remercie de me donner la parole et je voudrais m'exprimer. En premier lieu, si on parle de l'affaire de Sarah Halimi, je vais vous présenter un petit peu qui était Madame Halimi et un peu ses valeurs. Et aussi exprimer mon indignation face à cette décision de la justice. Ma mère nous a toujours éduqués à prendre nos responsabilités. Elle nous a toujours éduqués à remplir notre rôle. Elle nous a toujours éduqués à la droiture. Elle nous a toujours appris que l'on devait remplir ses responsabilités et les assumer. Elle nous a toujours appris qu'on ne peut pas rester indifférent à la souffrance et à la douleur d'une autre personne. Ce qui est très difficile pour nous, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, la justice, les autorités, ne remplissent pas leurs responsabilités vis-à-vis d'elles et vis-à-vis de tous les Juifs de France et vis-à-vis de tous les Français. Comment on peut ne pas punir un criminel? Comment on peut laisser et ne pas juger ceux qui ont la haine contre les Juifs et ceux qui veulent détruire la France. L'instruction de la justice, elle n'a pas été quasiment n'a pas été faite. Et on se pose la question pourquoi. Et on n'a pas les réponses. Alors on peut donner beaucoup d'éventualités, mais il faut comprendre les conséquences de cette décision. Qu'est-ce qu'elles peuvent engendrer? Oui, on est très inquiet des conséquences de cette décision pour ceux qui sont restés dans le quartier où vivait ma mère. Cette décision permet à n'importe quel fou qui veut se faire passer pour un fou, excusez-moi, de faire ce qu'il veut. L'impunité est très dangereuse. L'impunité est mortelle. Et ça, il faut comprendre, il faut le communiquer, et tout le monde doit en parler. Il faut au maximum être conscient de cela. Et oui, peut-être que si ma mère avait quitté le quartier où elle habitait, le quartier de Belleville, peut-être qu'elle aurait été avec nous aujourd'hui. Écoutez, il faut comprendre les conséquences, et chacun doit se soucier de sa sécurité, parce que malheureusement, la sécurité en France, elle n'est pas assurée. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for taking the time to tell us about your mother and about the case and what it has been like for you as a family. And an important reminder, as you say, that this is not even just about your family. It really is a message to all French Jews, to all French minorities, and not an easy message at that. Our thoughts are with you and your family in remembrance of your late mother. Well, joining the conversation now is attorney Francis Spisner, who has accompanied the Halimi family throughout this process. Mr. Spisner, share your insights with us on the legal history of this case, which has been so much in focus, as well as where things actually stand now looking forward.
L'affaire Sarah Halimi a choqué et ému la communauté juive de France. Heureusement, pas seulement la communauté juive de France. Et la manifestation au Trocadéro, dans le 16e arrondissement, a montré qu'au-delà de la communauté juive, l'émotion était réelle. Ce crime, qui est un crime antisémite, va donc être impuni, parce que la justice s'est fourvoyée. M. Traoré a fait l'objet de 3 expertises psychiatriques. Le premier expert disait qu'il devait répondre de ses actes devant une cour d'assises, même si son discernement était altéré. Le deuxième collège d'experts, après avoir reconnu qu'il s'était trompé puisqu'il voyait en lui un schizophrène, a maintenu qu'il ne devait pas être jugé, et le troisième collège a entériné ce que disait le deuxième sans répondre aux questions essentielles. La première, c'est que M. Traoré, au moment du crime, lorsqu'il défenestre Sarah Halimi, dit qu'elle vient de se suicider, pour essayer de tromper maladroitement les policiers, mais en disant cela prouve qu'il a bien conscience de commettre un crime. Et puis le deuxième élément, c'est que la justice reconnaît que c'est un crime antisémite et on ne choisit pas sa victime par hasard lorsqu'on est fou. Et donc il appartenait à la cour d'assises de trancher et les magistrats ont préféré finalement enterrer l'affaire Sarah Halimi. La loi va changer. C'est évidemment pour l'avenir un succès. Mais en réalité, cette idée que la loi ne prévoyait pas ce cas, à savoir que celui qui serait responsable de son état mental par une consommation excessive de stupéfiants, la Cour de cassation, en disant qu'elle appliquait strictement la loi, en réalité se réfugie derrière une attitude qui n'est pas conforme à ce qu'elle fait habituellement. Tous les jours, la Cour de cassation change, modifie, ajoute ou retranche à la loi. On appelle ça la jurisprudence. Donc cette affaire aujourd'hui, en France, est terminée. Mais il se trouve que la sœur de Sarah Halimi, citoyenne israélienne, elle a décidé de continuer ce combat. Et avec mon confrère Golnadel, nous l'accompagnons dans cette démarche puisque la loi israélienne prévoit que lorsqu'un juif est tué à l'étranger, si les raisons de ce crime, c'est précisément l'antisémitisme, la justice israélienne est compétente. Ce sera une procédure évidemment symbolique, mais la justice se nourrit aussi de symboles.
Thanks so much for that. And as you say, the case might be over in France, but it does continue in Israel. Well, we'll now hear from Avigail Winokur, a Yeshiva University student and a past winner of a Combat Antisemitism Movement Poetry Prize. She'll recite for us her poem written in memory of Sarah Halimi. Avigail, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. We're taught from a young age that Jewish blood is cheap, as it lines the cracks and fills the crevices of European streets and paints the walls of Israeli bomb shelters. Our lives are commoditized on social media when Insta activists claim their work is intersectional without ever mentioning a Jewish life. Sarah Halimi's death was met with silence, and her end was brought on by violence and proclamations from the Quran, a book of peace, sullied by the words of a monster. Where were the woke and colorful infographics outraged over her murder? Where were the voices stampeding the French court over their verdict that a cannabis high is an acceptable price for a Jewish life? We are alone in our activism. Jewish lives don't seem to matter. We are tokenized and weaponized when convenient. The message is loud and clear. Jews are never enough. We're never enough. We hear it behind your thinly veiled criticisms of our homeland, behind every comment in our university classes. Jews are the root of all evil. He screamed Allahu Akbar and threw Sarah Halimi to her death, though I'm not sure if God would think that's quite great, and it's certainly not in his name. The thing about Muslims and Jews is that we worship the same God, and I can tell you that this is not in his name. I'm sure millions of Muslims would agree that a cannabis-fueled, cold-blooded murder deserves more justice than a psychiatric hold. And because Sarah Halimi cannot speak for herself, we can't just speak, we have to shout until our lungs burn as badly as hers did as she took her last breath. Because Am Yisrael Chai and the nation of Israel is one. Ki ish echad v'lev echad, one man, one heart. We are a nation of oneness. The Talmud says that one life is one world. So in the name of the millions of worlds that have been robbed from us too soon, in the name of Sarah Halimi, we cannot rest until she receives justice. The guardian of Israel does not sleep or slumber, and as Gaza rains down rockets on our friends and families and Sarah's murderer is virtually free, we must continue to fight. We are messengers of God doing the holy work of justice for our fallen brothers and sisters, because even though they may all think that Jewish blood is cheap, we know that Jewish blood, any kind of Jewish blood, is more valuable than gold. May the neshama of Sarah Halimi have an aliyah, and we promise her soul and her family justice.
Avigail, thank you so much for a truly touching tribute. And with us now is CRIF Executive Director Robert Ejnez. Mr. Ejnez, thanks so much for being with us. And from your perspective, tell us a little bit about the mobilization of French Jews during this whole saga.
It's been 4 years that we're fully dedicated over the Sarah Halimi case. I remember that Sunday morning, eve of Pesach, a few days after Sarah Halimi's assassination. We were not many, just a few dozen individuals, essentially Jews, to meet in front of her house to say that we wanted justice for Sarah Halimi. We at CRIF have taken many initiatives to make sure the case would not be elapsed. We participated to demonstration and operations, and Francis Khalifa, CRIF's president, made numerous interventions to sensitize to the case up to the President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron. After the announcement of the decision of the Cour d'Assises, the highest and final French court, we were shocked and knew something had to be done publicly. The call for a demonstration for Sarah Halimi was an initiative of a small group of individuals led by Jonathan Béard to express the anger of the Jewish population over the decision and to call for leadership and public opinion on this abnormal justice decision. It was essential that the message be unified and federative. Therefore, the presidents of CRIF, Consistoire, and FSJU, the three main institutions of the Jewish community in France, published a public appeal to join the demonstration and officially brought their support to the organizing committee. At the same time, the presidents of the local and regional representations of CRIF took the initiative to organize local rallies in many French towns to express the same feeling of dissatisfaction and anger over the decision and call for justice for Sarah Halimi. At the same time also, as we published on social media, foreign communities expressed their intention to join the movement to request justice for Sarah Halimi, and the support of combating anti-Semitism was also essential for the diffusion of the message. And this is how, in a very short period of time, we were able to gather more than 26,000 people in France and many people around the world to demand justice for Sarah Halimi on the 25th of April, 2021.
Thanks so much, Mr. Ejnez. And next we have the privilege to hear from French philosopher, author, and filmmaker Bernard-Henri Lévy. Mr. Lévy, thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, when this first unfolded, there was a reluctance to even call it an anti-Semitic crime, as we've heard throughout this event. So how much, in your eyes, is French society actually unified against hatred in general and anti-Semitism in particular?
I think that the Sarah Halimi tragedy is the symptom of the depth in the French society of the denial of anti-Semitism. You are right, there was such a reluctancy to admit the anti-Semitic characterization of this murder. It was so long to have the justice to acknowledge the crude, brutal, savage, and evident anti-Semitic characteristic of it. So it proves that in the French society, you have this deep current of denial of anti-Semitism, this deep current of what I call the culture of excuse, the idea that anti-Semitism can be diluted in a social context, in economic condition, or whatsoever. This is one thing. On the other side, I have to say that since the death of the death of the law, the current law, which is the judgment of the Supreme Court in France, there is a huge movement in French society of solidarity with the family, with the memory of Sarah Halimi, and there is a global movement saying that justice has not been said, and that there is a crime against the right which has been committed by the French judges. This is a second point which I want to stress. Et de ce point de vue-là, il y a aujourd'hui dans les institutions politiques françaises, du sommet de l'État jusqu'au fond de la société civile, il y a un mouvement de prise de conscience et un sursaut incontestable du caractère insupportable de ce déni de droit. Maintenant, ce qui se passe aujourd'hui, grâce au CRIF, grâce à Francis Khalifa, grâce à tous les amis qui se sont mobilisés, ce qui se passe est d'une importance extrême, car nous ne sommes plus, pour la première fois, sur le seul terrain français. Nous ne sommes plus place du Trocadéro. Nous sommes sur la scène internationale. Et le nom de Madame Halimi, son pauvre nom martyrisé, son nom torturé, est aujourd'hui en train de devenir un nom de mémoire et un nom célébré au-delà de la France par tous ceux qui, dans toute l'Europe, dans tout le monde occidental et dans le monde entier, par tous ceux qui et toutes celles qui luttent contre l'antisémitisme et considèrent que l'antisémitisme n'a jamais d'excuse, que l'antisémitisme est un crime absolu, que rien ne saurait ni l'excuser, ni lui donner quelque circonstance atténuante que ce soit. Puisse le pauvre nom martyrisé de Madame Halimi servir d'emblème et de signe de ralliement à toutes les femmes et à tous les hommes de bonne volonté qui pensent que l'antisémitisme est le crime absolu qui doit être combattu partout et de toutes les manières. Voilà ce que je voulais dire aujourd'hui et merci aux organisateurs de cet après-midi, de cette réunion.
Merci pour ces mots, Bernard-Henri Lévy, and encouraging at least note that something, it seems positive, has emerged from such a horrific, horrific case. And I want to move to someone else now because Marie-Sarah Seeberger is the Digital Communications Manager at CRIF. Marie-Sarah, thank you for joining us and talk to us about CRIF's handling of the Halimi case and in particular the social media campaign, because we know that social media is really the place to spread hate and it can also be a place to stop it.
Hello everyone, exactly as Robert Ejnes has just pointed out, rallies for Sarah Halimi have taken place all over France and around the world, but not only. The mobilization was also massive on the internet and social networks. At CRIF, through our digital communication department, we invited internet users to follow this Republican movement online. It was indeed important that everyone could participate without necessarily being able to be there. The past year has shown us that the digital mobilization can do a lot and that it is just as powerful as the one of the streets. Internet users joined the mobilization under the hashtags Justice for Sarah, Sarah Halimi, and For Sarah. The Combat Antisemitism Movement group, together with CRIF, has launched a vast online campaign asking internet users to share the photo of Sarah Halimi on the day of the rallies on April 25th. In France, that day, over 12,000 tweets were made on the related subject, bringing the topic Sarah Halimi to trending topics on Twitter. In Europe, in addition to the hashtags already mentioned, the hashtag Parigi from Italy has been used many times, showing a huge Italian mobilization. The Sarah Halimi topic was also featured in trending topics on Twitter in the United States and Israel at the end of the day. As everyone knows, together we can do a lot. The involvement of internet users on social networks helps to create an international solidarity movement that we strongly welcome and encourage for the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's hard to deny, and like it or not, social media is such a huge part in cases like this, so great job for the work that you continue to do. Thanks for being with us, Marie-Sarah. Once in a while, an attack like this strikes a nerve far outside the local community. As you've heard, that is exactly what happened with the murder of Sarah Halimi, a crime that has galvanized Jewish communities around the world into action with a common mission to seek justice. For a look at the global impact this case has had, we have with us Isaac Herzog, chair of the Jewish Agency for Israel and a CAM advisory board member. Mr. Herzog, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So in your experience so far, how has the reaction unfolded, the reaction of Jews around the world to this case?
Look, I must say, first of all, personally, this is a shocking event. This is unbelievable, because when you read the details of the attack by Mr. Trawa, this vile terrorist, on Sarah Halimi, you cannot but say this deserves ultimate justice. Justice. And France is a country that always advocated justice, although it had its ups and downs in, centuries ago. Now we're faced with this case, which is an epitomization of what anti-Semitism is all about. Her neighbor harassed her constantly. This shows clear intention. And then he attacked her. So I don't think that the marijuana, cannabis story is really something that has an impact on the intention, because it's been there.
Not a lot of gray area here.
Now, I must say, look, she was a doctor. She's a Jew that wanted to live in peace and contributed to society and had her life. And all of a sudden, she's been, harassed and murdered in the most disgusting way possible. This has created enormous reaction. This is the reaction we've seen ranges all over the world. I want to congratulate CAM for putting this on the agenda, because this can't go away. I adopt the words of President Rivlin of Israel that there's no ability to any kind of easing up, mercy, or anything in light of such horrendous anti-Semitic hate attack.
So much of what you do is linked to speaking to those communities, to working with those Jewish communities around the world. So in a case like this, which we know is one that, as you say, has gotten more attention while there are thousands of others that sort of go unseen, what would you say, what would your message be to those communities right now?
First of all, say that the battle against anti-Semitism doesn't end. On the contrary, it goes up and down constantly. It's there. Hate of Jews is there. A combination with the right of Jews for self-determination and delegitimizing it is there. It's all combined.
Yeah.
Let's not get mistaken in any way. It's there. What we've seen is just, an epitomization of how cruel it can be. But we've seen it in history. And therefore, one has to stand firm against it with no ifs and buts, with clear moral clarity. And what I'm calling upon French leaders and worldwide leaders is for moral clarity.
So you're speaking about moral clarity, which is so needed. In terms of action, what might you recommend those communities to do, or individuals for that matter?
Well, I call upon the international community not to lay back, but to be extremely proactive in fighting hate of all kinds, and there's definitely anti-Semitism. And understand that the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism is the correct definition which needs to be adopted by the entire family of nations. That hate of Jews, unfortunately, is there and does not seem to go away. And the only way is to fight in 3 tiers. First and foremost, adjudication and legislation. This is the adoption of the IHRA. Second is taking defensive measures to protect Jews, communities, synagogues, and the like. And third, most importantly, is education. Put it in your curriculum and make sure that people understand the horrendous price of anti-Semitism.
Chair of the Jewish Agency for Israel, Isaac Herzog, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
And now let's bring into the conversation Etta Yudin, Quebec Vice President for Canada's Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs, or CIGA. Ms. Yudin, thanks very much for being with us. Share with us some of the perspective from over there. I mean, how has the Halimi case played out in that community, in that Jewish community?
Together with Jews around the world, we've been watching the case for the last 4 years, and it's clear that a strong message has been sent to Jews around the world, and we share the anger, we share the emotion, we share the sentiment of our sisters and brothers in France that anti-Semitism has to be treated as such. This case should not have ended the way that it did. Je suis Sarah, nous sommes tous Sarah, and when one Jew is affected, all Jews are affected. Since 2003, we've seen 12 Jews in France killed because they were Jews. And what we've seen over time is that when we turn away and when we don't address these situations and call them out for what they are, it's allowed to fester. Anti-Semitism is allowed to grow. And as we know, Jews, anti-Semitism are the canary in the mine shaft. And it doesn't end with the Jews. It may start with the Jews, but it doesn't end there. In Canada, we have started a national coalition to fight online hate and to advance legislation. The Canadian government in 2019 adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism as part of its anti-racism strategy. But on a more emotional level, we never stop watching, we never stop caring. Particularly, I think, in Montreal and Quebec, we feel very close to the Jewish community in France. And while sanitary measures due to COVID did not allow us to have an in-person rally, we had a virtual rally together with communities around the world for Sarah Halimi, where we were joined by the Chief Rabbi of France and by her brother, William Halimi. And we had close to 1,000 people, not just from Montreal, but from all of Canada. The emotion is high. I have in my hand letters. I have a whole package of cards and letters that were prepared by a bat mitzvah class in Montreal to send to the family of Sarah Halimi, to the family, to the Jewish community. But what I have to say is we all have a role to play. And we all have a duty to fight against anti-Semitism, to make sure that when it happens, it's called out and it's and it's addressed, and that justice runs its course. And we hope that we will see the day where Sarah's memory serves to at least create new legislation in France that will allow this to never happen again, because this is unacceptable, and we all stand together against anti-Semitism, and we all stand together with the Jewish community of France.
So important that all of those separate Jewish communities, even on opposite sides of the globe, are standing together and are aware of everything that does happen in that case. Eda Yudin, thanks so much for being with us, for showing us a little bit of what's been happening over there with this case. And we'll turn focus back to Europe, to another extremely significant Jewish community there in the UK. Marie van der Zyl is president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Ms. van der Zyl, welcome. Thanks for being part of this conversation. So from what you have seen and heard, how have British Jews seen and reacted to this case?
Look, today's gathering, as we can see, is under the banner Justice for Sarah Halimi, and an international movement is now born. As Jews, we've all got an emotive and a really powerful shared history in Europe. This vibrant and the deep history dates back to over 2,000 years, and for Jews everywhere, including in the UK, our successes, our contributions, trials and hardships, we feel them all as one. And different Jewish communities face various challenges, and our experiences day to day might not always be the same, but we all know there is one dark force that we are all too familiar with, and that is the fight against anti-Semitism. And a few weeks ago in London, around the world, thousands protested in cities denouncing the ruling by France's highest court that the killer of Sarah Halimi was not criminally responsible and will not stand trial. That caused absolute outrage. This was a real lack of justice, and it cast a ripple of absolute pain and anguish that was felt throughout world Jewry and here in the UK. And unfortunately, it's confirmed a worrying truth that all too often the fight against racism does not include anti-Semitism, and that when we are fighting for basic rights, Jews just don't seem to count. And going back to 2015, Jeremy Corbyn was considered as a potential leader of the Labour Party, and the British Jewish community, we publicised our long-standing concerns about his conduct and about anti-Semitism. And from that, we learned you cannot speak only in whispers. You have to stand up and say loud and clear, we will not be silenced on this issue. We refuse to let other people tell us how we Jews should feel. We refuse to listen to those who have the arrogance to try and tell us that by protesting about anti-Semitism, we will only create more anti-Semitism. We are Jews, and we have a right to be heard, a right that many centuries of our ancestors didn't possess. And we know this was wrong, and we demand change. And if you do not stop, you become impossible to ignore. We know some are going to mock, others may attack us, but we cannot be ignored. And only by staying silent in the UK, we know that those who hate you win. And unfortunately, when it comes to hate crimes, many countries have got gaps in the law that allow perpetrators to take advantage of the current system to avoid justice. Unfortunately, this includes cases in Britain where anti-Semites have repeatedly taken advantage of suspended prison sentences in order to continue campaigns of hate. And in the United States, where a man recently arrested for a series of attacks on 4 different synagogues was released on bail right back into the middle of the Jewish community that he had been terrorizing. And of course, we and many other Jewish communal organizations around the world were working with the governments in order to try to close these gaps. But the point has to be made, it just isn't good enough to close gaps after a miscarriage of justice. And in the UK, this is making us think that there is a real gap in justice in the realm of social media, because when it comes to the spread of hate, more and more incidents, they're being traced to online racism, online hatred, particularly via social media, and it really is a central ground for extremist radicalization. The current measures that social media giants have for users to report content which they find offensive or Jew hate is quite frankly inadequate. And we've been meeting public policy teams from Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. We've been demanding more effective methods of tackling anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial on these platforms. But there is a long way to go. And we do not believe that the social media giants are doing enough in the battle against anti-Semitism and hatred against Jews. The international community has got to stand together, and we've got to ensure the international adoption of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. That is absolutely essential. And we have to work together as a global community in the fight against anti-Semitism and hatred of Jews. We can learn so many lessons from one another. And that's why I can take some small comfort for myself in events like today, because we can demonstrate our strength and the extent of our love for our fellow Jews when we stand together. This terrible injustice to Sarah Halimi must never happen again. And we stand together with the French community. We absolutely do. In the UK, we send our sincerest condolences to the Halimi family and to the whole French community. We in the UK, we stand with you and we stand by you always.
I'm sure that's something that's very important for them, certainly as a family, to hear. And you mentioned silence. Of course, we have all learned from history the grave, grave price of silence, particularly there in Europe. So an important reminder on that. Mary van der Zul, thanks so much for being with us. Thanks to Marie van der Zul. And staying in Europe, we'll head to the Italian capital of Rome. From there is Ruth Durighello, president of the city's ancient Jewish community. Ms. Durighello, thanks for being with us. Welcome to this special broadcast. Tell us a little bit about how big an impact this case had over there in Rome's community.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me in this occasion and to share with you the experience that we had in Rome after the news about the sentence of the court in France. We were real disappointed about what was happening in France and in Paris and about the decision of the court. And then immediately I decided with the board of the community to bring the people on the square, even if we were still in the COVID period and were not allowed to go some numbers in the square, and make a big demonstration in front of the French embassy. It was the way for us to represent to all the people around us that Sarah Halimi was killed 2 times with that terrible sentence. It is a big problem for the Italian people and for the Italian Jews to represent to the other how the anti-Semitism is very strong in the society. But we did this work not just for us and not just for the Sarah Halimi memories and their family, but also because we know very well that this could be an example for others. The message that can pass to other people that they can kill a Jew. And even if it's recognized that it's an anti-Semitic killing, this could pass because someone drink or use drug or I don't know what, is terrible. And so we demonstrated to the others that the memory of Sarah Halimi is not the memory just of a woman killed with specific reasons, but without any responsibility. But we must take care of our responsibility now and tell to the others that's not acceptable. Not acceptable, not even in Paris, but anywhere in Europe and in the world. As I heard by the people that speak before me, we have a big problem of anti-Semitism that they come by the recognition of the other, what means anti-Semitism. And this is important in this moment, even much more than in others. In the past, we stay close to the family of other victims, of the families of Ilan Halimi that we remember in the Jewish community of Rome, of the family of Mireille Knoll that I personally hosted in Rome. And now is the time to be and to remember Sarah Halimi, because her killing was a killing of one woman of our family, and we must not forget. I hope that the work that we did from Rome, with the press, with the institution, with the embassy as well, with all the people we bring on the square and demonstrate for this case, help harder to don't pass what the families and what still other Jews are passing in this moment.
In Rome, Ruth Duragello, thanks very much for that and for all you've done to actually, bring about unity in this case with France. We'll move from Europe over to the United States, of course, a very significant Jewish community there. Let's see how it has unfolded there. Brooke Goldstein is founder and executive director of the Lawfare Project and founder of the End Jew Hatred Movement. She's been involved in raising awareness of the Halimi story amongst Americans. Brooke, thanks so much for joining us. You've seen many cases. Tell us a bit about your experience this time, especially stateside.
Thank you, Nurit. Hello. Jew hatred, the oldest form of prejudice, is why Sarah Halimi was tortured and murdered in her apartment. Jew hatred is why her killer got away for smoking weed. The Jewish people are fed up with this violence, and we are fed up with the excuses for Jew hatred. The Jewish presence in Israel is not a provocation. Sarah Halimi did not provoke her murderer because she had a mezuzah on her wall. She was murdered for being a Jew. What is inspiring to see, however, is that the worldwide Jewish community is united in their demand for justice for Sarah Halimi. Justice means a fair trial for Halimi's killer and consequences for the recklessly negligent police chief who gave the stand down order, which resulted in French police standing outside Halimi's door, refusing to enter as they heard the screams inside. The grassroots mobilization and protests we are witnessing take place across the world is significant. And the End Jew Hatred movement, together with over a dozen of our partners, is proud to be a leading organizer of these protests. At justiceforsarahhalimi.com, you will find information on protests happening all over the world and get the support that you need to organize your own. The time is now to gather in the streets, to make your voice heard, to show the world that there will be consequences for murderous Jew hatred. The time is now for Jewish unity and Jewish strength. Yet some are attempting to divide us. They want to divide the Jewish people on partisan lines. For this, they appropriate Holocaust terminology for partisan gain, accusing this or that politician of being a Nazi or a Hitler, describing this or that policy or event as a Kristallnacht or equivalent to a concentration camp. They attempt to divide us by pitting secular and Reform Jew against conservative and Orthodox Jews. There is only one Jewish people. But if history teaches us anything, it's that a strong, united Jewish community is what defeats the hate, not appeasement, not division, not partisan politics. We must resist all attempts to divide the Jewish community, both from within and from without. We must resist all attempts to categorize the Jewish presence in Judea, the Jewish presence in Paris, as a provocation. Up until now, the Jewish community has been organized from the top down, and this has served us well. But the 21st century climate requires the type of bottom-up mobilization that we are now seeing with Sarah Halimi protests everywhere. Bottom-up mobilization requires everyone to take upon themselves the responsibility to get up, stand up, get out on the street, post on social media, film videos of yourself, tag influencers, create memes, and do everything possible to make our voices heard. You can do this by showing up at your local coffee shop and asking them to display a poster of Sarah Halimi, the same way they displayed one for other minority rights movements. We will no longer accept the double standard. If we continue to be unified in our demands, we will succeed in creating social, political, and legal consequences for Jew hatred. That is why it is so important to continue to take to the streets with peaceful and lawful protests so that Sarah Halimi's face is never forgotten, so that the world understands they can't get away with excusing a Jew killer and with excusing Jew hatred in all of its forms everywhere. Please visit justiceforsarahhalimi.com and make your voice heard.
Thanks very much, Brooke Goldstein. And for another American perspective, Jason Guberman, Executive Director of the American Sephardi Federation, joins us to break down his organization's efforts to attain justice for Sarah Halimi. Mr. Guberman, welcome.
Thank you, Nurit. Why has France, a country under the rule of law, allowed pot smoke to obstruct justice for Dr. Sarah Halimi? This is a question on many American minds as an increasing number of U.S. states decriminalize or even legalize cannabis. In this view, the decision of the French judiciary to preemptively exonerate Dr. Sarah Halimi's torturer, murderer, and defenestrator because of an alleged delusional puff is not only unconscionable, but unfathomable. Such a travesty of justice can never happen here, or could it? In fact, the U.S. is already a land of explainers, if not excusers, for evil. We see this in the expedient headlines every time there is a mass shooting or other terrorist attack. No matter how lengthy the manifesto or how loudly the murderers proclaim their motivations, the media moves in to rationalize what happened. This is because an increasing number of Americans, as our French friends, have developed an aversion, maybe even an acute allergy, to speaking the unabashed truth, especially concerning anti-Semitism. Tragedy replaces atrocity as a way to euphemize evil, as well as to deny agency and responsibility. Ideology is ignored or simply labeled insanity. In this way, as Albert Camus once warned, words are prostituted and tyranny advanced. So let us speak clearly. Dr. Sarah Halimi was not killed by a momentarily mad pothead, but a violent religious extremist for whom her Jewishness played, quote, a triggering role in the unleashing of violence against her. While the original prosecutor, Francois Molin, tried to deny the murderer's anti-Semitism, even the Court of Cassation conceded the point, albeit without daring to name its Islamist source. But that is exactly what we must do, because Islamist violence is rooted in Islamist belief, what Egyptian playwright Ali Salem calls a culture of death, a culture of irresponsibility. It is a culture in which a person considers all the others to be his enemies. These words were echoed, perhaps in an unlikely place recently, in the land of the two holy mosques, by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's Council of Senior Scholars, who ruled that the Muslim Brotherhood, in all its offshoots and guises, contradicts the guidance of our true religion, causing discord and inciting sedition, violence, and terrorism that are contrary to the teachings of Islam. Islamism cannot be ignored, explained away, and certainly not appeased. It must be opposed, and there's a growing coalition of the decent already engaged in the fight. Dr. Judea Pearl rejected the mantle of martyrdom and the claim of victimhood for his son Daniel, preferring instead to see in his story a proud reminder of who we are and what we stand for, as well as a subtle reminder of who our adversaries are and what they stand for. May the memory of Dr. Sarah Halimi similarly be for such a blessing and inspiration.
Well, we're going to be looking closer at the situation inside France, but first let's turn to the Kfar Silver Youth Village in southern Israel. There, 28 olive trees, a symbol of peace, are being planted in memory of Sarah Halimi on behalf of the Combat Antisemitism Movement. It's the same site where CAM planted olive trees last year in memory of Lori Gilbert Kay, who was murdered in the 2019 Poway synagogue shooting. The trees meant to serve as a tribute to Sarah Halimi's legacy and to make sure her memory and story won't be forgotten.
האדם נגדע ואני לא יודע איפה הייתי ואיפה אהיה כמו עץ השדה כי האדם עץ השדה כמו העץ הוא שואף למעלה כמו האדם הוא נשרף באש ואני לא יודע
And now we'll go back to France for a briefing on the state of anti-Semitism in the country, where Jews have been targeted with violence, as we've heard numerous times in recent years. CRIF Vice President Jonathan Arfi is joining us now. And Mr. Arfi, tell us more about contemporary anti-Semitism in France and where you think the Halimi case sort of fits into that bigger picture.
L'antisémitisme en France, ce sont bien entendu des actes, mais c'est aussi une atmosphère. Ce sont des actes et donc des chiffres. Nous avons chaque année en France plusieurs centaines d'actes antisémites qui sont répertoriés par les forces de police, par le ministère de l'Intérieur et par les services de la communauté juive. Et ces actes antisémites représentent ensemble souvent près de 50% de l'ensemble des actes racistes de ce pays, alors que les juifs ne représentent qu'1% de la population. L'antisémitisme, je le disais, c'est également une atmosphère. C'est une petite délinquance du quotidien qui peut rendre la vie difficile pour des personnes qui sont identifiées comme juives dans leur environnement du quotidien, dans le voisinage, dans le cadre scolaire, dans le cadre professionnel. L'antisémitisme aujourd'hui représente pour de nombreux juifs une forme d'épée de Damoclès qui pèse au-dessus de leur existence, avec le sentiment qu'à tout moment, ils peuvent être victimes d'un acte ou d'une menace antisémite. Notre sentiment, c'est que l'antisémitisme n'est pas spécifique à la France, mais que c'est en France que plus qu'ailleurs, et plus tôt qu'ailleurs, il a frappé. Je vous rappelle que depuis 2000, nous avons eu en France 12 juifs assassinés en tant que juifs par l'antisémitisme. Et notre sentiment, c'est que cette spécificité de la France tient peut-être à une autre particularité. C'est peut-être en France que plus qu'ailleurs, il y a eu une convergence entre les différents courants antisémites. Il y a en France un antisémitisme violent issu des djihadistes, un antisémitisme terroriste. Il y a un antisémitisme antisioniste que l'on retrouve à l'extrême gauche. Il y a un antisémitisme traditionnel dans certains milieux chrétiens. Il y a un antisémitisme culturel dans une partie de la population musulmane. Un antisémitisme social également dans certaines couches défavorisées. Eh bien, tout cela, cette hybridation, cette convergence des antisémitismes produit un contexte particulier à la France qui, malheureusement, a conduit aux actes que nous connaissons depuis la mort d'Ilan Halimi en 2006 jusqu'à celle de Sarah Halimi cette année.
All right, Jonathan Alfi, thanks very much for weighing in. Also from CRIF, and joining us now is Amin El Hatmi. He's president of Printemps Républicain, a French civil movement seeking to fight racism and extremism and promote secular values. Mr. El Hatmi, thanks so much for being with us, and tell us about the role of French civil society, in particular in combating anti-Semitism.
Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes. Je suis très heureux de vous retrouver et je voulais remercier le CRIF et Francis Khalifa, son président, pour leur invitation pour parler de ce sujet éminemment important qui est la lutte contre l'antisémitisme qui a été d'une actualité très forte dans notre pays ces dernières semaines avec notamment évidemment l'affaire Sarah Halimi. Que dire en 2 minutes sur la question de l'unité républicaine face à l'antisémitisme, si ce n'est rappeler des évidences. Et la première d'entre elles, c'est que cette unité, elle est indispensable. Elle est indispensable pour plusieurs raisons. Et d'abord parce qu'elle est la meilleure réponse à ceux qui considèrent que la lutte contre l'antisémitisme est l'affaire de la communauté juive, que c'est à elle de s'en emparer, à elle d'y trouver des solutions, à elle de s'en préoccuper. C'est ces responsables politiques qui considèrent notamment que dans l'affaire Sarah Halimi, l'émotion suscitée par cette affaire est l'émotion de la communauté juive, comme si il fallait être juif pour se sentir ému, touché par un meurtre, un assassinat d'un enfant dans une cour d'école, de clients d'une supérette, d'une grand-mère défenestrée de son balcon. C'est nier ce qu'est la République elle-même dans ses fondements, c'est-à-dire une assemblée de citoyens qui sont un peuple qui se retrouve autour du commun et qui, au-delà de leurs croyances, au-delà de leur religion, au-delà de leurs convictions politiques, philosophiques, spirituelles, sont d'abord cette assemblée de citoyens. Et donc, lorsqu'il arrive un malheur à Sarah Halimi, c'est d'abord à cette citoyenne, à cette femme française de confession juive que je pense, et ce n'est pas pour moi l'affaire, l'inquiétude ou le combat d'une communauté, parce que c'est précisément un combat universel. Merci à vous et à bientôt.
Well, fighting anti-Semitism was a top priority for Manuel Valls during his tenure as French Prime Minister from 2014 to 2016. Mr. Valls is joining us. Welcome. Merci beaucoup de nous avoir rejoints. And from your practical experience, tell us what steps can be taken to better protect Jews in France.
Comment ne pas être bouleversé par l'assassinat de Sarah Halimi et choqué par l'absence d'un véritable procès que motiverait l'irresponsabilité pénale supposée de son meurtrier. Je veux dire d'abord ma compassion, mon soutien, ma solidarité à la famille de Sarah Halimi. Nous ne devrons jamais, jamais l'oublier. Cette décision de justice me blesse, nous Français et républicains. C'est un véritable naufrage judiciaire et moral. Sarah Halimi a été assassinée le 3 avril 2017 dans des conditions épouvantables, nous le savons. Son assassin récitait des versets du Coran tout en la frappant et en la précipitant dehors. Le but antisémite était bien là, celui de tuer une femme juive parce qu'elle était d'abord juive. La chambre d'instruction, la procédure judiciaire l'ont reconnu. Le caractère ordonné, précis du comportement de l'assassin, du meurtrier, poursuivant le but antisémite, ne concorde en aucun cas avec la thèse d'un manque total de discernement. Une maladie se comprend, un crime se juge, un crime antisémite avéré se juge d'autant plus. C'est un crime antisémite, un de plus dans notre pays, la France. Il aurait fallu un procès pour que justice soit rendue. Ce procès n'aura pas lieu. C'est pour cela que je demande, j'exige avec beaucoup d'entre vous, un changement de la loi. Et nous le savons, c'est désormais un engagement du gouvernement de la France. L'antisémitisme ravage nos sociétés depuis des siècles. Il ravage la France depuis plus de 2 décennies. Cet antisémitisme qui vient de l'extrême droite, de l'extrême gauche, de nos quartiers populaires, du monde arabo-musulman, sur fond de paraboles de haine d'Israël et des Juifs, de haine tout simplement de la France. Cet antisémitisme est insupportable et justifie mon engagement, notre engagement, car ce n'est pas l'affaire seulement des Français juifs, ça serait trop facile. C'est l'engagement de chacun d'entre nous qui est demandé. Nous devons éradiquer cet antisémitisme qui annonce tous les malheurs du monde. Nous devons l'éradiquer de notre société. C'est le sens de mon engagement. Et nous le devons à tous ceux qui sont victimes de l'antisémitisme. Et nous le devons à Sarah Halimi, à sa famille, à ses proches, à tous ceux qui croient dans les valeurs de la France et de notre République. Pour Sarah Halimi, cet engagement est plus que jamais indispensable, nécessaire.
Thank you to former Prime Minister Manuel Valls for your vocal advocacy against anti-Semitism. And as he says, it is not just a Jewish problem. Well, the city of Paris is home to France's largest community, Jewish community rather. It's where Sarah Halimi called home. Earlier this year, they took the step of adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, working definition of anti-Semitism, a key tool in the fight against Jew hatred. Today we have with us Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, who will tell us about efforts to combat anti-Semitism and bigotry against other minorities at the municipal level. Mayor Hidalgo, welcome.
Mesdames et messieurs, il me tenait à cœur d'être avec vous pour rendre hommage à Sarah Halimi. Le 4 avril 2017, à Paris, cette femme a été victime d'un meurtre antisémite intolérable. Nous ne pouvons l'accepter. Paris ne peut l'accepter. C'est pourquoi, comme je m'y étais engagée lors des manifestations du 25 avril dernier, je présenterai lors du prochain Conseil de Paris une délibération relative à la dénomination de la rue Sarah Halimi, située à Paris-Centre. Cette rue se trouvera à proximité de la crèche où Sarah Halimi était directrice. C'était un engagement et ce sera une réalité. Les murs de notre capitale porteront son histoire et son visage. Des crimes comme celui-ci nous intiment de nous souvenir pour ne pas oublier, et ne pas oublier pour éviter que cela ne recommence. Ilan Halimi, Myriam Monsonego, Gabriel Arié et Jonathan Sandler, Johan Cohen, Yoav Attab, Philippe Braham, François-Michel Saada, Mireille Knoll, Sarah Halimi, que ce soit à Toulouse, à Montauban, à Paris, à Vincennes ou ailleurs, c'est à chaque fois le même scénario, où des hommes et des femmes, des enfants sont tués parce qu'ils sont juifs. Un venin insupportable qui ébranle la République tout entière. Nous devons rester vigilants partout, à Paris et ailleurs. Vous pouvez compter sur moi pour que la haine et l'indifférence n'aient jamais leur place à Paris, dans nos rues, dans nos quartiers et dans nos vies, mais aussi dans nos rapports avec les autres. Vous pouvez compter sur moi pour porter haut le devoir de transmission, notamment aux plus jeunes. Je pense bien sûr aux commémorations du 80e anniversaire de la rafle du billet vert. Je me suis d'ailleurs rendue vendredi dernier au gymnase Japy, puis à la gare d'Austerlitz, avant de rejoindre Pithiviers et Beaune-la-Rolande. Je veux aussi avoir un mot sur la situation actuelle au Proche-Orient et les manifestations liées. Comme j'ai eu l'occasion de le dire, l'interdiction par le gouvernement de la manifestation pro-palestinienne de samedi était une décision sage, même si c'est toujours une décision difficile. Je me souviens des violences en 2014 lors d'une manifestation où des propos terribles, comme « mort aux Juifs », avaient été proférés à Paris. Et Paris ne peut pas être le terrain d'affrontement qui importerait ce conflit sur notre territoire. Vous pouvez compter sur moi pour lutter contre l'antisémitisme. Toujours, je serai là.
Thank you, Mayor Hidalgo, for everything you're doing to push back against antisemitism in your city. Merci pour votre combat sans relâche contre l'antisémitisme dans votre ville. Now, next, for a global perspective, we have with us United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Ahmed Shahid. In 2019, he published an extensive, first-of-its-kind UN report addressing anti-Semitism as a human rights issue. Special Rapporteur Shahid, welcome.
Can you read? I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to Combat Antisemitism and the Representative Council of French Jewish Institutions, CRIF, for inviting me to join this digital event. I express my solidarity with all who are calling for justice for the late Dr. Sarah Halimi, retired physician and mother of three, who was brutally murdered in a clear and outrageous anti-Semitic hate crime in Paris in April 2017. The murder itself was absolutely shocking and horrendous and deserves the utmost condemnation, and there must be full accountability for the murder. Seeking and securing that accountability to the judiciary is a duty we owe not only to the memory of Sarah Halimi, but also to society at large. The final judgment by the court that the murderer should not stand criminal trial on account of his altered mental state, the result of the deliberate consumption of narcotic drugs, is a denial of justice. This may be an application of the letter of the law, but it is clear as daylight that it is denial of justice. As CRIF President Francis Califat stated, it deprives Sarah Halimi's family of a trial that is essential to their mourning, and the French people a necessary trial on anti-Semitism. I therefore add my voice to those who are calling for justice for Sarah Halimi and stand in solidarity with the Jewish communities in France and around the world who face a tide of anti-Semitic hate crime. By overlooking criminal responsibility because of consumption of narcotic drugs, this case sets a dangerous precedent, and we all know too well where impunity for hate crimes lead us. In addition to ensuring justice for Sarah Halimi, France and other countries also need to urgently face up to rising anti-Semitism. Such hatred was already high even before the ongoing pandemic, but became intensified during the pandemic, as has other forms of hatred. In my report to the UN about a year and a half ago, not only did I warn that anti-Semitism is toxic democracy where it was unchallenged, but also highlighted a number of measures that need to be taken by states to combat anti-Semitism effectively. The starting point of my recommendations was to ensure that the legal framework was sufficient to punish and deter anti-Semitic hate crimes, and to ensure further that victims of anti-Semitic hate crimes, which include families of those affected, have access to justice and effective remedies. I also note in my report, as do other monitors, that a large proportion of anti-Semitic hate crimes, as with other hate crimes, go unreported. One of the main reasons for underreporting is the absence of effective mechanisms to offer access to justice to those affected. The Sarah Halimi case is a stark example of such denial of justice, and this has to change, not just for the legitimate demand for justice for late Sarah Halimi, but to ensure that we rid our societies of this scourge of anti-Semitism, and to ensure the law facilitates justice rather than impedes it. I pray for justice for Sarah Halimi and for her family, and call on all duty bearers to ensure justice for her and her family, and for all those who stand in solidarity with them.
Thanks so much to Ahmed Shahid. Now, for an American take on the case, we turn to former U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Antisemitism, Eli Kohanim. She played a key role in fighting anti-Semitism during her 2-year tenure at the State Department. Ms. Kohanim, thanks so much for being with us.
I'd like to start by thanking the Combat Antisemitism Movement for gathering all of us together for this most important conversation. My first message is to the family of Sarah Halimi and to the Jews of France. Please know that you're not alone. Please know that I am with you, that there are Jews all around the world who are with you. And we are not going to stop until we have achieved justice for Sarah Halimi. We all know that Sarah Halimi was murdered in the most vile anti-Semitic attack, one of the worst in France's history, one of the worst anti-Semitic attacks in Europe's history, and probably one of the worst in world history. And so the idea that French officials are going to ignore the fact that the murderer of Sarah was shouting Allahu Akbar while he took a Jewish innocent grandmother and threw her out the window of her apartment. The notion that French officials are going to ignore these facts and they are not prosecuting her murderer at all, never mind that they're not prosecuting him for hate crimes, is an unacceptable fact, and we cannot rest until we've achieved justice for Sarah. Because in that moment, Sarah Halimi became every Jew on this earth. And just like in the Dreyfus case, it's been written in the history books as a turning point and a low point in France's history. Sarah Halimi's case is also a turning point and a low point in France's history. And so we stand with you. We are here to demand of France that they must revise their hate crimes legislation. There can be no loopholes for hate crimes, for anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic attacks. And finally, we demand that these hate crimes legislation changes be made retroactive to Sarah's murder, because we will not rest until we have justice for the murder of Sarah Halimi. And to the people of France, please know that anti-Semitism and the hatred of Jews, it starts with Jews, but at the end it has destroyed every society that has allowed it to flourish. And so to the people of France, I say, stop this madness. Demand justice for Sarah. Thank you for coming out into the streets and protesting in the thousands. But you and I and people of good conscience all over the world, we cannot stop, we cannot rest until we have justice for Sarah Halimi. And with that, I thank you.
Thanks so much, Eli Kohanim. A reminder how important legislation is, certainly in this case. And on that note, Irwin Cotler is a former Minister of Justice and Attorney General in Canada and a tireless advocate for human rights. He currently serves as Canada's Special Envoy in preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. He's also chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. Mr. Cotler, welcome. So we've heard how much, of course, the court case is so crucial in this situation. Talk to us about the legal steps that can be taken to protect Jewish communities worldwide.
Thank you, Nuri, for the kind words of introduction, and thank you to the Combat Antisemitism Movement and to CRIF for organizing this timely and significant forum. In the last weeks alone, the annual audit by B'nai B'rith of hate crimes in Canada demonstrated that for the fifth consecutive year, Jews were the most targeted of minority groups. The Anti-Defamation League demonstrated that in the United States, American Jews were the most targeted group for hate crimes. And reports which were emanating out of Europe, whether it be the United Kingdom or Germany or the Ukraine, and I can go on, demonstrated that Jews are the most targeted group for hate crimes in Europe. And in fact, the United Nations and the UN specialized agencies demonstrate as well the emergence of the selective indictment and opprobrium against Israel as a targeted collective Jew among the nations. Moreover, as the United Nations Special Envoy, the European Union Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Katharina von Schnurbein, put it, the actual incidence of hate crimes targeting Jews is actually much greater than the reported crimes themselves. For much of the hate crimes against Jews, in fact, go unreported. And they go unreported because Jews either are not reporting the hate crimes, or they believe if they report it, they would go unaddressed or unredressed, or they do not trust the authorities from their experience that they will do anything in order to prevent and protect against these hate crimes. And because, regrettably, anti-Semitism has become mainstreamed, normalized in the popular culture, in the international arena, such that it is underpinned by a culture of indifference almost, a culture of impunity, an utter lack of outrage. And where the anti-Semitic murder of Sarah Halimi is a dramatic case study of both the pandemic of anti-Semitism on the one hand and the indifference and impunity that underpin it on the other, which otherwise as well incentivize the further acts of anti-Semitism. And where, for example, the murder of Sarah Halimi was not an isolated event, but it was part of a pattern, a context, a culture of anti-Semitic incitement and hate crimes targeting Jews of France, where police not only did not respond quickly and effectively to prevent and protect against the murder, but in fact, they refused, despite repeated calls, to conduct an internal investigation into what had happened, where prosecutors were reluctant to prosecute the murder as an anti-Semitic hate crime, where the judiciary did not address the anti-Semitic criminality with the gravity and the appreciation that it warranted, where, for example, a man who threw a dog outside a window under the influence of alcohol was held criminally responsible. But the person who threw Sarah Halimi and murdered her in an anti-Semitic act under the influence of inebriation was in fact held not to be criminally responsible. Where the media, the French media, did not report properly on the murder, consistently sanitizing the anti-Semitic details. And where the legislature has not adopted the necessary legislation to protect against and guard against the incentivization of such crimes. Accordingly, what is needed, and I say this as a former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, one who is also serving as a chief prosecutor, let alone as a longtime parliamentarian in the legislature. What we need are dedicated hate crime enforcement units who are also educated in the ability to identify, recognize, monitor, and combat anti-Semitism, where prosecutors, judges, civil servants, media, and legislatures have equally to be educated and trained to recognize, identify, monitor, and combat anti-Semitism. In conclusion, the murder of Sarah Halimi is a looking glass into what needs to be done globally to combat this pandemic of anti-Semitism. For reasons of time, I will just enumerate the imperatives for such an action plan. Number one, we have to enhance the adoption and implementation of the IRA working definition on anti-Semitism, the most authoritative, comprehensive, and international definition that we have. And if I may say so, as somebody who was present at the creation and throughout the 15-year process of adoption, the most representative definition, because it was adopted after a 15-year period of democratic engagement involving intergovernmental bodies, governments, parliaments, civil society leaders, experts, and the like. Two, we have to mainstream the IRA definition as an educational and training resource across all sectors of society, including, in particular, as I referenced, the justice sector. Number three, we need to invoke and mainstream the parliamentary antecedents that underpin the IRA definition. The London Declaration for Combating Anti-Semitism, adopted at the Inter-Parliamentary Conference on Anti-Semitism in London, and then the Ottawa Parliamentary Protocol, adopted at the Inter-Parliamentary Conference to Combat Anti-Semitism in Ottawa. We need to invoke and mainstream the combating of anti-Semitism in the social media. We are witnessing now a pandemic of anti-Semitism in the social media, the renewal of the classical anti-Semitic tropes of the Jews as the poisoners of the wells, which have found expression where Jews, the Jewish people, and Israel are blamed for the manufacture, the spread, and indeed profiting from the COVID-19 pandemic. Where political leaders, and here I want to salute Premier Valls of France, where political leaders have to adopt a zero tolerance policy with regard to anti-Semitism, whether it's within their own political parties or in the public arena as well. Where what is needed at this point is for countries respectively to adopt a national action plan to combat anti-Semitism, and where anti-Semitism must also be combated in the international arena, because where we are witnessing there is the laundering of anti-Semitism under the protective cover of the United Nations, the authority of international law, the culture of human rights, and indeed under the struggle against racism itself. As former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan put it and shared it with me a number of times in discussion, that a United Nations that does not put the combating of anti-Semitism as a priority on its agenda is a United Nations that betrays its past and forfeits its future. And so, in a word, anti-Semitism, as I began and conclude, is an assault on our common humanity. It cannot be fought or won by Jews alone. It requires a global constituency of conscience to combat it. And as we've learned only too painfully and too well, that while it begins with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Erwin Kotler. Well, interfaith unity is really needed to build a better future free of hate. We have with us now spiritual leaders from the three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, who will tell us how cases like Halimi's only underscore the need to build stronger cross-religious ties. First is Imam Hassan Shalgumi, the Imam of the Drancy Mosque near Paris, and a prominent proponent of interfaith cooperation. Imam Shalgumi, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us. Tell us about the French Muslim community's reaction to the murder and legal proceedings in this Halimi case.
Nous sommes tous concernés lorsque l'une de nos compatriotes françaises est sauvagement assassinée par un terroriste soi-disant déséquilibré. Et nous sommes également tous concernés par cet arrêt de la Cour de cassation. Nous sommes concernés parce que demain, n'importe qui y pourra commettre des crimes et se prétendre ensuite sous l'emprise de stupéfiants et ainsi ne pas être jugé. Sarah Halimi est une femme médecin, directrice de crèche, appréciée par tous et pieuse. Pour lui rendre hommage, je citerai un principe essentiel des grandes religions monothéistes. Aime ton prochain comme toi-même. C'est un principe universel. L'injustice qui a été faite à cette femme et à sa famille a été faite à des Français, au pays des droits de l'homme. En tant que compatriotes, nous devons tous être solidaires. Nous devons nous battre pour elle et aussi pour nous et nos enfants pour que justice soit rendue. Merci.
Thanks very much. And moving on, Father Christophe Le Sourd is responsible for the Church of France's relationship with Jews. Welcome to you, and thanks so much for being with us today in this conversation. Father Le Sourd, do you see a specific role for the French Christians in fighting anti-Semitism, and what is it?
Bonjour à tous. Le dimanche 25 avril dernier, nous étions très nombreux, place du Trocadéro à Paris, à participer à un grand rassemblement. Rassemblement organisé pour un hommage particulier rendu au docteur Sarah Halimi, malheureuse victime d'un épouvantable acte antisémite avéré. À cette occasion, nous avons partagé d'intenses moments d'émotion, en écoutant les membres de sa famille ainsi que leurs avocats, de même de nombreuses personnalités venues exprimer leur soutien. Souvenez-vous, nous étions présents dans la plus grande diversité de nos convictions et sensibilités. Mais une chose nous unissait, la volonté de dénoncer toute forme de racisme, de rejet de l'autre en raison de son identité, de ce qui le constitue dans son être le plus profond. Or, nous le savons, il y a actuellement une dangereuse résurgence de l'antisémitisme. À ce sujet, le 1er février dernier, les évêques de France ont publié une déclaration extrêmement importante qui fera date. En effet, relayant l'appel du pape François à la fraternité universelle et rappelant pour les chrétiens le lien spirituel unique avec le judaïsme, les évêques de France ont redit combien la lutte contre toute forme d'antisémitisme, politique ou religieux, doit être l'affaire de tous. Et il est très essentiel de le comprendre. La lutte contre l'antisémitisme ne peut pas, ne doit pas être l'affaire de nos seuls frères et sœurs juifs. C'est une question qui concerne chacune et chacun d'entre nous. Pour cette raison, expliquent les évêques, lutter ensemble contre l'antisémitisme et l'antijudaïsme sera la pierre de touche de toute fraternité réelle. Souvenez-vous, il y a 35 ans, Jean-Paul II était accueilli à la grande synagogue de Rome. Lors de son allocution, faisant référence à la Shoah, le pape rappelait « Ce peuple qui a reçu de Dieu le commandement « Tu ne tueras pas » a éprouvé en lui-même d'une manière particulière, singulière, ce que veut dire tuer. Alors oui, chers amis, n'en doutons pas, lutter ensemble énergiquement contre toute forme d'antisémitisme, c'est aussi contribuer à sanctuariser toute vie humaine. Toda Rabba.
Merci, Father Le Sourd, for that message. And finally, we're honored to welcome Rabbi Chaim Corsia, the Chief Rabbi of France. Thank you so much, Rabbi Corsia, for being with us. And tell us, for you, about the interfaith response, and in France in particular, to this case.
Merci de m'avoir donné la parole après le témoignage de l'imam Chagoumi et celui du Père Le Sourd, parce que nous travaillons ensemble et c'est vrai que nous avons vécu un moment assez bouleversant place du Trocadéro il y a quelques jours. Nous étions ensemble pour faire deux choses, prier, réciter un psaume, le psaume 133, qui disait qu'il est bon et agréable que les frères résident ensemble. Et puis, pour faire la prière pour la République. Je sais que pour le CRIF, c'est une prière importante, et le président du CRIF, Francis Khalifa, me demande souvent de réciter cette prière. Nous le faisons comme une sorte de prière collective, d'invocation collective pour l'ensemble de la nation, et notamment nous le faisons avec beaucoup d'émotion, avec le président Khalifa, devant l'hypercachère. Devant ce même hypercachère, où Manuel Valls, que vous avez entendu il y a quelques instants, avait dit cette phrase prophétique: « La France sans les Juifs n'est plus la France ». Et je crois que tout ce que nous avons entendu à propos de cette affaire terrifiante du docteur Sarah Halimi, d'abord de son assassinat, des conditions de son assassinat, de la sorte de volonté que je n'arrive pas à m'expliquer d'une grande partie de la justice, d'abord de minorer les faits, puis de considérer qu'il n'y a rien à faire puisque il y aurait eu une inconscience de l'assassin. Mais quand la Cour de cassation s'est enfin prononcée en disant que non, il n'y aurait pas de procès parce qu'il était irresponsable, la tribune que j'ai faite dans le Figaro a amené le président de la République à proposer cette transformation de la loi. Oui, il y a une différence entre quelqu'un qui est fou et qu'on ne peut pas juger et quelqu'un qui se met lui-même en situation de devenir irresponsable. C'est pas la même chose. De la même façon, et j'ai aimé entendre le Premier ministre Manuel Valls et Amin El-Khatmi dire que dans ce combat contre l'antisémitisme, qui ne peut pas être le seul combat de la communauté juive, le procès était nécessaire pour établir les faits, pour établir la radicalisation, le chemin de radicalisation de l'assassin, pour voir les éventuelles complicités. Et une fois qu'on arrive au bout du procès, qu'on a établi les faits, alors oui, on dit il peut être jugé ou pas jugé. Mais c'est tout ce chemin qui nous manque et que nous devons accomplir ensemble. Et c'est quelque chose que nous devons à la mémoire du docteur Sarah Halimi. Je voudrais vous dire que il y a eu, en Amérique par exemple, à Pittsburgh, il y a eu des assassinats dans une synagogue. Il y a eu partout dans le monde des assassinats avec cette pulsion antisémite qui est au fond la pulsion qui vient détruire une société. Parce que l'antisémitisme, c'est le venin qui vient s'instiller dans la société, dans toutes les sociétés, pour les détruire de l'intérieur. Le rêve de ce qu'est la République, c'est un rêve de fraternité. Avec toutes les religions en France, nous bâtissons une fraternité réelle. C'était la phrase du pasteur lors de cette cérémonie place du Trocadéro. La fraternité est à la fois de l'ordre de la religion et de l'ordre de la société. Eh bien, nous allons bâtir et rebâtir une société fraternelle qui est la plus belle des réponses à celles et ceux qui veulent propager la haine. Contre la haine de la terreur et de l'antisémitisme, nous avançons tous ensemble avec la force et la puissance de la fraternité et d'une citoyenneté parfaitement partagée entre tous.
Thanks so much to Chief Rabbi Corsia for that message. And before we wrap, I just want to go back to CRIF President Francis Khalifa for your final words, especially after hearing everything that we've heard here from people around the world.
Écoutez, je voudrais d'abord remercier Keim pour cette initiative exceptionnelle de nous avoir donné l'occasion de traiter de l'affaire Sarah Halimi d'abord et à travers cette affaire emblématique de ce qu'est l'antisémitisme dans notre pays, d'écouter ces témoignages aussi importants que nous avons eus, tant du monde religieux que au niveau national, que de nos amis politiques, que ce soit la maire de Paris, que ce soit Manuel Valls, que ce soit notre ami El-Khatmi, mais aussi le Père Le Sourd, et aussi le grand rabbin de France qui vient d'apporter en conclusion ces mots forts pour parler de l'antisémitisme. Et je voudrais également remercier l'ensemble de la mobilisation internationale qui vient de se faire autour de ce dossier Sarah Halimi. Je suis persuadé que cela contribuera très fortement à faire progresser l'affaire et nous espérons que cette affaire pourra être réouverte et que Sarah Halimi aura enfin droit à la justice.
Merci à vous, merci à tous And with those powerful interfaith messages as well, we'll come to a close. Thank you for taking part in a display of global solidarity with the Halimi family and the French Jewish community as a whole. Remember, if you missed anything, a full recording will soon be up on the Combat Antisemitism Movement social media and website. And we hope you are inspired to stay engaged in the international movement demanding no legal impunity for perpetrators of anti-Semitic crimes. Only together, through collective action that you've just heard about, can we ensure that justice is served.